On this week's episode of the Agentic Advantage, Masaki and I have a special guest, David, who's a solution engineer here at UiPath, ready to share with you best practices and actual customer case studies about how to do agentic automation right from the start.
We're looking for information from an expert who is engaging with customers, talking about agentic automation all the time. This is the episode. Don't miss it.
On today's episode of the Agentic Advantage, Masaki and I have a special guest. He's going to outline his point of view on agentic automation, and he's going to give us some specific use cases from his customers that I think are going to illuminate for you how to do agentic automation right and how to succeed with real ROI.
Worked with David, who is a sales engineer from UiPath, in a lot of customers' environment, and he's being a great advocate of agentic automation. So we are very excited to hear some knowledge from him. David, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Masaki. Well, it's been fabulous to partner with you, especially Masaki, on a number of customers at this point with adopting agents and agentic automation. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I think we're at a point where we've really learned a lot from our customers as much as our customers are learning from us. And by way of introductions, I'm a sales engineer here at UiPath, and I particularly focus on manufacturing and retail customers, although I have customers in quite a number of segments at this point. Here's the reality. I was really excited to join this podcast today because I really think that agents and the agentic orchestration that we are seeing right now is going to be business process management's finest hour. Right there's the goal has been for many years to automate end-to-end business processes, but what's really kind of come to fruition is disjointed pieces of business processes getting managed, usually the little bits of data moving from place to place, but it always gets kicked out to a human. We call this sort of like the cognitive or thinking step in an end-to-end process. With the onset of agents, which is basically controlled AI, and I'm sure we'll get much more into that later in the episode, we now have sort of that final ingredient that's needed to make end-to-end business process management truly real. So I'm stoked to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
David, we're glad to have you on the Agentic Advantage, and I'm glad you teed it up with that exciting kind of point of view on agentic automation. But if you would allow me to throw a little bit of cold water on that. You know, there was this report out of MIT which revealed that a lot of these agentic, or I should say AI pilots, weren't delivering the value or the ROI that the business expected. And I think we all saw that, right? Customers were racing to put money into an AI project per se, largely because their boards and other outside influencers were telling them to do so. But I think there was a lack of discipline in that approach. But I'd love to hear your perspective on those results we saw out of that report, and maybe you could unpack it a little bit for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of folks have read that report by now. It kind of came as no surprise to me. One of the big findings of the report is that the main lack with those 95% of companies that are not seeing the ROI out of their AI initiatives is that they weren't deploying it in a scalable way against their own business processes. They were trying to take sort of the intelligence part of a process and see if that could provide value without taking into account the larger business process. So this just kind of goes back to my first point, which is around, we need to be looking at the other way. It's not like AI is somehow going to completely transform everything overnight. What it is going to do is stitch together the pieces of business processes that really should be automated today. Another part of that article, by the way, which I think is relevant to your question, Bill, was that the research found that AI was most successful when it was being applied in back office automations, which was, to your point around cold water, a little bit of a drag to read, right? Because most organizations want to do more with AI than just automate back office automations. They want to, in fact, it sounds like half of those, the initiatives that were put into place, if I remember correctly, were for sales and marketing initiatives, and those largely failed. So I think what we're really reading in that report is just a state of where we're at right now in terms of live pilots and POCs. What I can say is that while we are seeing a ton of success in back office automation, like sales order reading, I'm working on an agentic pilot right now with one particular manufacturer with sales order automation. Another one around two customers around complete AP transformations. One of them is going global. One of them is trying to fix a number of bottlenecks, like 20 bottlenecks that they found in their AP process last week, in the last few weeks as they've done a workshop together. So there's a ton of potential on the back office side. But and Masaki, you and I are both involved in a couple of customers now who are working on the customer side, on the order side, and even in sales, to accelerate sales processes. So while I think it's a cautionary tale, that article, I don't think it's dampening customers' appetite to truly transform their customer-facing processes.
Yeah, I'm glad you unpacked that. In fact, last week Masaki walked us through a use case of an actual customer, and I think what that illuminated is that the customers that are getting real ROI from agentic automation, layering AI into an automation process, are doing what you just said. They're looking at the end process end to end, and they're trying to figure out how do we extract the most value from it. One of the use cases I brought up on this podcast is a customer in the utility space and in a contact center specifically, where they had an automation from UiPath running and they extended it with agentic, right? So they inserted agents to take more of the process away from the call center agent to shorten the average handling time of that call, reduce the burden on the call center agent. And I think that's what you just revealed, if I'm not mistaken, as kind of a best practice.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a great example of AI sort of augmenting the value of automation, right? Versus completely uncovering something never touched before. It reminds me of another customer I'm working with who is automating sales order entry. It's a very complex manufacturer. They have a lot of like thousands and thousands of custom products. It's a configure to order type manufacturer. And sales order processing is extremely cumbersome for them because they'll receive orders from customers, but there's no telling whether that's actually a product that this company sells or whether it's a product that customer is authorized to buy, for example. And so there's a lot of intelligence and research that has to happen in order to decide, is this a valid order or not? So it's the order validation step. They've been unable to approach it in the past, and what's really led to is non-adoption of the automation. In fact, it takes folks longer today to use the automated version because it keeps getting kicked out to people to handle. And so there's very low sort of customer satisfaction with this automation internally. That's turning around now that we've released agents, which have gone, live with UiPath a few months ago. They're really turning that around by taking each of those friction points and addressing them with agents, so it doesn't have to keep getting kicked out to people.
One thing I learned a lot from a customer's engagement plus multiple POC engagement is agent is really supposed to be in charge of a really specific part of the whole process. And I experienced that most of the development time when I work on agentic automation is actually most of the part is deterministic part, like the BPMN process layer is deterministic, and you make a lot of robotic process automation because what kind of process should be done exact way. The part we need to rely on agent is this decision that is kind of ambiguous and it requires a semantic understanding of data. By narrowing down the scope of the agent process, the accuracy is going to increase. So the whole process is going to be more stable. So that's really, I think that's the hidden secret why UiPath agentic automation is actually bringing value to the customer's environment.
Well, and that's talked about in the MIT article, right? I mean, that's the missing business context that's causing a lot of these AI POCs to succeed, but then not bring value because it gets non-adoption by the business. It's like, this is not put in context with the way that we have to do things, right? There's not enough guardrails. There's not enough traceability. And so that's called out. you bring up a good point around AI having a limited scope. And so one thing I coach my customers to think about is the idea of controlled agency. All right, with the idea of an agent needs to have a predefined scope. The same way if you bring an employee on, you don't let that employee just run every part of the sales process or AP process. They've got a role, and there's a certain time they need to start that role, end that role, and there's deliverables from that role. And so I coach my customers to think about agentic scoping in terms of roles, like what sort of a role should this agent play? Um, and I had one customer when I was on site with a workshop who asked me like, "That's not enough. Like I want AI to run my whole process. Like I don't want to even think about my business process anymore. AI should just be smart enough to figure it out." And he said, because we were spending a lot of time figuring out this BPMN flow, the business process modeling notation flow for this long running workflow for them. And I said, would you just let an individual decide the way to execute a sales contract? Would you let just an individual decide how to, whether or not to approve an invoice, and when to skip approvals, for example? Like, you wouldn't. And if you wouldn't let a really smart person do this, you wouldn't let an agent do it. So this idea of controlled agency is super crucial.
Yeah, David, let's go one level deeper, because what you and Masaki are hitting on is what Masaki just said. It's the secret to success. But to get to that level of the business process and to get into the weeds about the specific steps that need to be agentified, if you will, or where an agent can add the most value, or if they don't have any automation, what that whole process looks like, that is a significant amount of work. And generally speaking, at the lower levels of the organization, people are very comfortable with doing a process the way it's always been done, right? So how do you encourage your customer to rethink the process and do the hard work to go through BPMN, to identify the steps, to determine where agents, robots, and people play a role? Because let's just be honest, that's not easy work. The return on investment is extremely high, but the effort isn't minimal, isn't small.
That's exactly right. And it's a delicate dance. What I tend to find is that the idea of AI and agents resonates with individual contributors within a process. Like, so if you've got a business process that touches 20 or 25 folks, like it does for this AP process that we're working to transform with a major manufacturer right now, each of them understands like, hey, I just wish it could do this. I just wish it could do this. But it's important when you're encouraging an enterprise customer to adopt an agentic process, not to just take the first idea that comes and try to make that work. It's to use that momentum, that groundswell, to uncover the larger business process. And so this is something that I work with my account teams on quite a bit, is in getting enough potential business value to capture the attention of leaders and present that point of view to them, to say, hey, if you took this seriously, this is what we hear from your people. This is what we understand from industry benchmarks. Let's truly transform this process. What do you say? And that becomes the motion we're running with a lot of our customers.
Yeah, that value-led process discovery is so important, right? Like helping the customer see the value before embarking on the hard work, and then getting leadership engaged in that to sponsor it and support it. Because, people have to take time away from their day jobs to help us identify what this process looks like, where are the bottlenecks, where are the required approvals, and all those things. But if you start with value, then you have somewhat of a North Star that you're driving towards.
Exactly.
I think I want to add there is, if the customer is already using robotic process automation like UiPath, these things become a tool for the agentic automation, the components. So it's going to be a rocket start for those customers, because they don't need to build all the components from scratch. They can leverage the existing components, and they focus on the agent part. Then the value they can see is going to be you can see the value very quickly in that way. So the leadership team is going to be comfortable, so they can go ahead with the more challenging use cases maybe after seeing those success. So David and I worked with JCI. JCI had a lot of robotic process automation developed already. What they did was they added the agent component to the existing automation, and they saw a huge success. And now they are so into agentic automation strategy. So I think that's what a lot of enterprise companies should do.
Let me play devil's advocate, Masaki. Let's
Yes.
assume that the customer has a new process that they haven't automated, or it's a customer that we haven't worked with before. And you've got IT, you've got the business, and someone says, why don't we just use agents for the whole thing? Why do we need robots? Why don't we just use AI? It's smarter, it's faster, it's better. How do you address that topic and that rebuttal or that concern? Because there's such a frothiness about AI and agentic right now that people just want to go for it full speed ahead. But how do you address that very legitimate question?
Yeah, I think David mentioned a great point like 5 minutes ago. It's like when we think about actual employee, do we actually trust the person to do everything without the guardrail? You're probably not. Our product manager director Taki often says agent is almost like a digital employee, but human is a more physical employee. But they actually can do almost the same thing, but that means you have to put the same kind of guardrail so those entity like human agents can perform in the expected way under the company guardrail. So I mean, company could try with whole agent process without guardrail. They will probably feel the pain a lot from that security risk and the inconsistent output. You just need a guardrail for that. David, what do you think on that?
Yeah, to me, it's a matter of using the right tool at the right time. And I think that's something that's very distracting in this field right now, is that everyone naturally wants to have their first AI application go live and start making money for them or saving money for them. The reality is you should just be focusing on running a great business. And now that AI is out there, it's one more tool to help do that. And actually, Ashim mentioned this on the UiPath earnings call yesterday, which was public. He mentioned that a surprising effect over the last 6 months for us is that we're actually uncovering deterministic traditional automation opportunities faster than ever because of agentic. Because what happens is we'll get in the door by talking about AI, and then they'll describe a process that really doesn't require agentic automation. And we'll be able to propose the right tool at the right time for them, because the UiPath is sort of the full stack automation platform that it is, right? For example, at Masaki, I'm thinking of a use case you and I are working on right now, where literally half of the rules that are being processed with this use case are deterministic. We thought it was all going to be AI. Half of them are deterministic, and half of them are AI, truly AI. So they work very well together.
That's a great point. In fact, I was in front of a customer yesterday. We were talking about their S/4HANA migration, and we've identified a number of automation potentials inside this large project. And the question came up about AI and agentic. And our point of view was, let's use agents and AI where appropriate, but let's use robots, traditional deterministic robots where appropriate also. And to your point, David, the majority, I would say 80% of the use cases in these S/4HANA transformations, 80 to 90%, are deterministic, traditional robotic process automations that add stability, they add security, they lower risk, they lower total cost of ownership, right? There's so much benefit there. But to your point, sometimes we hear, well, let's lead with AI or agentic, but in fact, the better way to do it is with traditional robotic process automation, and then layer in agentic where necessary to extend the value.
Well,
In the traditional RPA component, there's a agent capability we added, like we can call agent, we call autopilot. So when you develop the robotic process automation, you might have to kind of coordinate all the activity manually, but autopilot for developers will help you to coordinate those logic and even write the code for you. So development time is going to be faster. So I think although we tend to see the process like, oh, agent is, more intelligent than RPA, it's hard to implement, it takes time. It's not true. Gen AI is actually also helping to build the RPA components even faster.
Great point. Hey, David, can you maybe pick from your vast library of projects you're working on with customers and maybe illuminate for the audience how this process should work when you're looking at end-to-end processes and you're trying to figure out how to automate them with both robots and people and agents? Can you pick a use case or two to share with us?
I certainly can. I was thinking before we came on today because I wanted to speak on that exact subject. And what I came to is that there isn't just one way that these things happen, but what I will speak about is two different ways it can happen. There was one use case where we got the opportunity to speak with a senior leader, senior P&L owner over a business in a large electronics manufacturing company, and we're able to do a webinar on our position on where manufacturing is going, and we were sort of. We really weren't sure what to expect. We had our standard objectives of the webinar. What came out of it was a deep pain that we had basically identified during this webinar with this leader and his first line leaders underneath him. And what followed was a very detailed and procedural leadership driven dive into this deep pain that this business unit was experiencing, which agents are going to play a part in helping solve. But it is truly an end-to-end business problem. And so what it allowed us to do was, as a true agentic automation partner, come in, discover the whole problem, discover the future state process, and drop the right tools in at the right time. And that's actually going to kick off next week. So we're beginning implementation on that project next week. I love when things happen like this.
Let me just interject. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, don't be a hammer looking for a nail. Look at the process or the problem in totality and identify what your KPIs are, and then choose the right tool for the job. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And when the reason that won't work sometimes is because it's because this problem has plagued this customer, and they've tried many things, and so it took a lot of convincing for them to come up and basically allow us to come and give them a chance at that. And that's not always politically possible in some organizations. Some problems are just so big, they've tried so hard, and it's just not the right time to bring it up. So that's why I like to bring up the second opportunity, which is the bottoms up opportunity. That's where you're seeing AI. You're seeing individual contributors are surfacing opportunities for AI. And that's where as a sales engineer and as an account team, we can come and help organize that groundswell into something that we're positioning further up the chain, which is what I described earlier. So I don't want to repeat myself too much on that. But those are the two ways that I tend to see projects really come to fruition.
It's funny you mentioned the fear aspect. I was on a call this morning with a customer who's evaluating UiPath Test Cloud. And one of their concerns is they've tried various test products that haven't worked. And they're concerned that the organizational muscle or whatever has held them back previously, whether it was a tool or the change management or something else, that's going to plague them here. So I think that's a very real concern that people listening to this podcast should determine as they're thinking about where to drive the most value with automation, whether it's traditional or agentic and AI.
Precisely. I think that's what keeps a lot of people in sort of non-AI native products, like UiPath being an AI native product. What keeps people out of it is fear, resistance, and just not being willing to invest the time and stick their neck out for it. So that's what I completely agree. It's a non-trivial problem.
So, David, if among the people listening to this podcast are thinking to themselves, okay, I have a process in mind. I want to tackle this process. I believe there's a big opportunity for my organization to drive efficiency, reduce risk, increase compliance, save money, whatever the KPIs are. What are the steps you would guide them towards? Because for some people, this may seem like such a large problem with various stakeholders inside their organization, various budgets, various political situations. Like maybe give to someone guidance as they're thinking about a specific process to be automated.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always start with pain. It was funny. I was talking about pain with my family members who are not in AI and tech and the sales, the go-to-market world. And they were like, pain? What do you mean? You talk about pain all day? They were like really surprised by that. But yeah, it's pain. So figure out what's painful about the process and don't shy away from it. Figure out individual contributors, individual people who truly their lives are worse because of the current state. And then find the leaders who have to bring reports about what's not working to their leaders on a weekly or monthly basis. Compile those pains and turn those pains into solutions. So you'll need to educate yourself on how agentic automation works and the different components of it. There are five main components that make up a good agentic automation platform. You can learn all about them. We just launched an automation or an agentic automation developer course. It's about 13 hours of work. I know it's a bit of a commitment, but you'll come out the other side really capable to speak to solutions to problems. So start with pain. And then basically identify the return on investment. And you can you'll need to work with a partner like UiPath to help you understand what the investment's going to be, but start to have an eye immediately on what the return could possibly be.
A great perspective. Such a good perspective. And I think I would also add to that while you don't, what's the old adage? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? I think that when I'm sitting with customers, that's how I coach them as well, right? Start, look at the process in its entirety and break it down into chunks that are manageable to solve. And if you have a partner like a UiPath, we can help guide through that process. I'm glad you mentioned that developer course. We can link to that in the show notes. But as we start to conclude here, I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, like give the audience your point of view on how to begin this journey into agentic automation. I think you said it. Either you said it earlier in the podcast or you said it in our preamble. This AI portion of automation unlocks so much exciting value for companies, right? And for people. I'm so glad you mentioned the pain because just as a side note, I was talking to a customer, a large utility, and I asked the business leader what keeps her up at night. And she said, my people are suffering under these broken processes, like literally losing sleep because processes break and then it falls on their shoulders, right? And that's a real human problem. But as we approach the problem from a pain perspective, and as companies think about ROI, they think about engaging leadership, like maybe you can give our audience some closing remarks on how to approach this elephant and take it down one bite at a time.
Yeah. I would say bite the elephant while it's sleeping, right? And I guess what I mean by that is timing. So you were discussing an S4 transformation, for example. That's one of our kind of bread and butter opportunities to approach customers and say, it's time to rethink this. We've been talking to you about improving your SAP processes. There's actual momentum within your organization now to redo the your SAP approach. let's please talk to you about how we are helping keep 90 plus clean core when you're doing your next S4 transformation, right? So it's the right timing. So if you're trying to think about, hey, how do I get started? I would say what processes or part of the process you want to tackle is changing, is already got leaders' attention. And I would say come with an agentic perspective.
That's such wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really good practical way for our audience to tackle these problems, which once you do and you get on the other side of the problem and you've already automated it, most customers look at back and go, gosh, I'm so glad I went through that process, that I did it in a structured way, because now I'm returning real value to my organization and real value to people in the organization, which at the end of the day is what we care about.
Absolutely.
Masaki, any closing thoughts here before we wrap up this episode?
I'm so excited that all the customers are now working with us to explore agentic automation opportunities, and I really enjoy working with David. I think the important thing is be open-minded about new challenges. Agents is a new thing. Every enterprise customer is an exploring phase, but you've got to you've got to take the first step to start anything. And I think that would be my closing statement.
Great perspective, Masaki. David, thank you so much for joining us. I could talk to you for another hour. I think we're going to have you back because there's so many other questions I want to ask you. Really appreciate your market perspective. I think that's really valuable to our audience. And for the audience, if you have questions for David or Masaki or I, please leave them in the comments, like and subscribe to this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Agentic Advantage.